Hello, my name is Nicole, and thank you so much for taking the time out to listen. Today, I titled this message, The Past Hidden Truth, and we are going to focus in on our family history today. Those of you all who are familiar with my book, Genealogy X, What to Expect When Researching Family History, you know that in that book, I give you some tips on going back down memory lane and getting that family history documented and ready for the next generation to come. It is very important to go back in history when you see some disturbing things taking place in modern day times with family members. It helps to be able to look at how people dealt with issues and why it is so important not to do the same things that others have done when what they did just doesn't work. Pattern after pattern of all sorts of family medical woes, and yet people will just look the other way, make excuses, run a public relations campaign for the family, ignore mental illness, ignore all sorts of advice that was given to mothers carrying children, and proceed to do whatever floats one's boat. The Holy Spirit showed me that so many in different families do some hurtful things that cause problems for the present generation and the one to come, because they refuse to change, because they ignore wisdom, because they don't want to do anything that changes dysfunctional traditions. They want things just to go as they have always been. But today I'm going to give you some powerful examples as to why it is crucial to pay attention to when family members reveal some serious truths, and also why you don't want to be that one that's repeating history, and you don't want to be that one encouraging others to repeat some toxic things from the past. The examples that I am going to bring to you today zero in on mothers who once carried us. I'm going to talk about the types of things that some of these mothers were told to ease the pain, especially while pregnant. Others weren't told too much of anything. Rather, they did whatever made them feel good or whatever their doctor told them. Now, keep in mind, the era at which a lot of the information that I received was circa 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. So I should say eras. And during the time period, women were told that they had to tough it out when it came to morning sickness, unless, of course, they were able to see a doctor. Then they were given a drug. And then that drug was known to have some side effects. And so some women opted out of various drugs, supplements, or anything else that they heard through the grapevine didn't work. Others went on and took some things, and then their babies suffered as a result. Some ways that women dealt with their pregnancy woes was some continued to smoke, others continued to drink alcohol while pregnant, and then there were those who were still partying and participating in all sorts of substance abuse while pregnant. Now, why is it that it's necessary to take a look at these examples? Well, If you look around at some of those individuals in your family that have their share of mental disorders, the Lord showed me that some of these issues date all the way back to when the mothers were carrying these children. Some of the stories that we were told about why someone looked the way they looked and why they acted the way they acted had a lot to do with some birth defects. Now, if I don't want my secret out, I'm not going to tell anyone too much of anything, especially if I'm guilty, you see. There was a drug that was given back in 1957 up until 1961, and this particular drug, thalidomide, or thalidomide, was withdrawn because it was known to cause birth defects. Okay? This particular drug was given when women were experiencing morning sickness. So if there was a baby that grew up to be an adult and had all sorts of interesting defects, and the mother took this drug and she didn't tell anyone, then there's the family history story that floats around that's based on somebody's assumption and not necessarily based on facts. Now, that's an example of how family history can be just kind of swept under the rug. And the next thing you know, people are telling some falsehoods, or people don't necessarily do their research. And so people come up with all sorts of things. Now, a lot of these women were still smoking while they were pregnant. And they were smoking because they wanted these smaller babies. They had heard that if they continued to smoke while pregnant, they wouldn't get really big babies. And then, of course, the babies wouldn't wreak havoc on their small frames. But I tell you that you reap what you have sown in so many different ways. Because when you look back, and even now, women who do this sort of thing, they refuse to give up smoking while pregnant. When you take a look at all of the side effects that take place as a result of smoking while pregnant, it's a wonder that some of us made it. Okay? Now, we're told that smoking while pregnant will lower the amount of oxygen available to the mother as well as the baby, that it will increase the baby's heart rate, that it will increase the chances of miscarriage and stillbirth. Now, if I love whatever it is that I'm doing, in this case, a mother who is smoking while pregnant, and she miscarriages as a result of smoking, she's not going to tell that story. She's going to come up with something else. Okay? If you weren't in the room when the doctor gave her the news, or she suspects that she was at fault, she's going to come up with something else. But that smoking while pregnant increases the chances of miscarriage and stillbirth. It also increases the risk that the baby is born prematurely or born with a low birth weight. It increases the baby's risk of developing respiratory lung problems. When you think about the past and you think about what some people were doing back then and what they're still doing, you can connect the dots on why some family medical history has a pattern. Because you got people who keep doing the same thing that mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers and great whoever did, you see. Increased risk of birth defects. Increased risk of sudden infant death syndrome. So the more that these women were smoking, the greater the chances of their babies having health problems. Now that information I got from WebMD.com, and some of that information was information that was passed around the family. Those that were bold enough to tell the truth about what some of these folks were doing and why some of the children had the problems that they had and why some didn't grow like they should have. You have some of those mothers who were smoking while pregnant to thank. Something else from the past that has a way of showing up. Once again, zeroing in on these mothers with these secrets, and they're letting family history just play out in whatever way that they want, or going along with whatever doesn't make them look guilty. What about the effects that one experiences when a mother is drinking while pregnant? What about those effects? Well, I took the liberty of doing some research because I noticed that there were a lot of family members that were talking about folks drinking back in the day, and they were talking about the clubs that they had been a part of and how they liked to party, and they were talking about the alcoholics in the family. And once again, I noticed a pattern with some of these folks. They would talk about how back in the day, this child and that one was so wild and unruly and didn't do so well in school and all of that, right? And then the Lord, I'm just going to give credit where credit is due. The Lord said, pay attention. Pay attention. There was some alcohol-related birth defects with some of these folks. When I did some research, they call it fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. And what's interesting is that the mothers who were drinking and what they were doing was resulting in all of these issues with the baby. Eventually the babies grow up, and there's some permanent damage in certain areas of the brain as a result of the FASD, the fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, the alcohol that the mothers were drinking. I just wanted to drink because, I didn't want the pain and I didn't want to have to go through too much, and I wasn't about to stop partying. Some of these mothers were almost bragging. Some of them were told to drink because they were young when they had babies. They were told to drink whenever they had pain because mothers were not running their young daughters to any hospitals. You got yourself in this mess. Oh, well, you're going to have to deal with it. There's some alcohol over there. You drink that. You can't stand the baby kicking. You can't stand the pain. You see. So what was this doing to the baby or babies, since there were many of them who did this sort of thing? Well, people who have fetal alcohol spectrum disorders have problems with coordination, emotional control, schoolwork, socialization, and holding a job. And the sad part about it is that the alcohol, the drinking that the mother did, it was passed on to the children who later on start drinking just as she did. So if my brain is already affected as a result of the fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, okay, and then I continue to drink later on in life, I'm only making matters worse for myself. And that's what some of these people in the family did. Okay. When people experience all sorts of neurodevelopment disorders, alcohol-related birth defects, and so forth, and they don't even realize why they do what they do. We might be on the outside looking in at some of these folks, and we see their bad decisions. We see how they make the same old mistakes, how they trust all the wrong people, how they don't understand the consequences of their actions. When I did research, I came across the NIAAA.nih.gov site that discuss what I am talking to you about. This fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, alcohol related types of things, okay? Some of the risk factors the site says: poor health and inadequate nutrition. This is what leads these women to drink. Living in a culture where binge or heavier drinking is common and accepted. Some of you all, depending on your ethnicity, depending on your upbringing and where you grew up, you know that partying, woo, that's a big deal for some people, and they don't care that they're pregnant. Little awareness of FASD. For some people, this is the first time that they're hearing this sort of thing, and they're connecting the dots. This is why so-and-so behaves in the way that he behaves. This is why this person is hard to deal with. Those alcohol-related birth defects, not receiving adequate prenatal care, the mother tossing up the bottles. I don't have the money. I don't have anybody to take me where I need to go, and this pain is happening right now. It's bothering me, and so she starts drinking. Social isolation, exposure to higher levels of stress, especially if a parent is very ashamed or disappointed that their teen daughter got pregnant. They will isolate themselves, and then when they isolate themselves, they're depressed or they're sad about some things, and so they just start drinking. And they don't care that they're pregnant. You see, while we're praying and we're hoping and wishing that God will do some things, some folks, God is not moving upon because there's a generational curse going on. There's a curse that people bring upon themselves because mother did it, grandmother did it, great grandmother did it. All these different people were doing some things that were wrong. And in their mindset, they think it's okay. It's all right. We're on the outside warning folks. And they are still doing things that are causing all sorts of problems for themselves as well as their future offspring. Now, if that wasn't enough, I got to give you another example how this past has a way of showing up in the present. People are way past childhood. They're young adults or they're mature adults, and yet they still have the effects from when a mother was not doing all that she could have done while pregnant. What about the drugs that these mothers take? There's been studies that show that various drugs result in miscarriage, premature birth, low birth weight, and a variety, listen up, a variety of behavioral and cognitive problems in the child. A baby can also be born dependent on the drug if the mother uses it regularly, a condition called neonatal abstinence syndrome. Now, history has a way of repeating itself. If the mother had her share of drugs, whether legal or illegal, the point was when she was taking drugs while she was pregnant, that teen, young adult, mature adult has a craving one day, has a feeling, wants to experience something and gets attached. It's like meeting an old friend again. She was using cocaine, or she was using heroin or some type of inhalant, marijuana while she was pregnant, some type of methamphetamine, okay, nicotine, prescription and over-the-counter drugs. And so there's those side effects that take place as a result of each one of these drugs. Okay. So I looked at some more information, And I was disappointed to read, of course, that there was more patterns and more issues as a result of all of these outside influences upon a poor baby, affecting its brain. You see, when you hear people say things like, no matter what I do, no matter how much I pray, I mean, I'm not seeing any changes with some of these people. Can we just be honest? Can we just be transparent? Can we just say that some folks are just not going to change? That some folks are just here on this planet. They're going to get the opportunity to live like everybody else, but there is no change. God is not doing anything with some of these people. I know it's one of those things where we wish and we hope and we pray, but when God himself is not touching some of these people, we got to know. We got to know that there's a reason for that. We don't have to find out all of the details. We just know that God is not healing some people. They have permanent brain damage as a result of what a mother and others have done. There was a term that we used called Kroc Baby back in the 90s. And these were the children who were emotionally disrupted, cognitively impaired. Okay. They couldn't interact socially. And some of them died from sudden infant death syndrome. And it was also known as SIDS. And it was all related to cocaine that was used while these babies were in the mother's womb. And so there were mothers that were being arrested when babies were born, stillborn. They were experiencing all sorts of criminal charges and so forth. And so when other mothers heard about this sort of thing, they were not about to go to the hospitals because they didn't want to be prosecuted for using drugs. So even though they really needed some help, they were apprehensive about getting the help for fear that they were going to be arrested. Because if drugs were found in their system and something was going on with the baby and drugs was found in the baby, they were going to jail. The prenatal cocaine exposure had many symptoms, and even now, if a mother does this sort of thing, she might as well expect to see her child having all sorts of behavioral dysfunction, developmental issues, and there's been studies that say that some of these developmental issues resemble attention deficit disorder. The cocaine users end up having these babies thinking that, oh, well, my secret's not out. But it shows up when you have a child that has ADHD. And then as the child gets older and there's more issues that take place with cognitive skills and attention problems and so forth, it's safe to say that what she did is why this child continues to struggle. And then once the child gets older, like an old friend once again, gets around some peers, gets exposed to some cocaine, and then you have another one who is addicted in this world. There's been data that suggests that there's an increased likelihood that children exposed to cocaine prenatally will require special needs programs. So the next time when you look at some of these special needs programs and you see some children having all sorts of developmental issues, not everybody is born in this world with their share of issues just because of Mother Nature. No, some of it has a lot to do with what the mother was doing while she was pregnant. Once again, if you go back down memory lane, if you start talking to family members and people who know a thing or two about what was transpiring with mothers and fathers and what was around, it's safe to say why people behave in the way that they do. All of these different personality disorders are on the rise again. What's going on? The Lord showed me that part of it goes back to mothers. Mothers carrying babies and doing all sorts of things that they shouldn't be doing while pregnant. Those amphetamines and meth and these types of things, whether legal or illegal, children exposed while the mother's pregnant. Turns out the studies report that during prenatal development, there's a decreased arousal, increased stress, decreased school achievements once the baby's out, right? Moving along, headed to school, movement disturbances, low birth rate. And once again, a high risk factor for special needs programs at school age. We talked about nicotine. And the scary thing is that when you think about something that so many people do, and then the mothers are either smoking themselves or exposed to the smoke, lots of issues result. Some of the things that I came across was prenatal nicotine exposure impairs cognitive functions in animal models and in children. Nicotine inhibits it actually affects estrogen in the placenta and interferes with sexual differentiation of the brain in males, and changes have been observed in the timing of puberty, onset in gestationally exposed male adolescents. Interesting, right? This is nicotine. And then alcohol. The alcohol, as we very well know, prenatal alcohol exposure can cause intellectual disability, deficits in learning, attention and motor development, and hyperactivity. So, lots and lots of things affect the mindset before the children even have their feet on the ground walking. And then once their feet are on the ground walking and they're getting older, they have these symptoms that don't leave. And we're praying and we're fasting and we're going to the Lord, and the Lord is saying, the brain is permanently altered. All we can do is just pray that the person's not going to freak out, that the person's not going to go on attack. And then some of them do end up going on attack, depending on how much they've been exposed to all sorts of things. Prescription medications have an effect on fetal development. There was a study done on rats. The rats were exposed prenatally to some prescription medicines, and it was found that they had a lower sensitivity to pain, that they had increased repetitive stereotypic-like activity, they had higher anxiety, decreased level of social interaction. Lots of things were going on as a result of prescription medicines. So if all of these things were taking place with some of these mothers in our families, and then later on, these babies grow up to become adults, and then they have children of their own, it's no wonder that the children end up having their share of issues if these adults are repeating the same patterns that the ones before them were doing. You see? So I took the moment to just think about these things. And when I took the moment to do this, I felt a deep sadness, because people who don't like to take up time and do research and try to figure out, well, why is it that I struggle like I struggle? And I mean, was I born this way? I mean, what happened? They tend to walk around with an identity crisis of sorts, never thinking about, well, what was it that my mother was doing while she was pregnant with me? You see, but God, He exposes many things. Now, some of that information you can find on these different websites. National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, that's the NIH. You can go to WebMD, and there's numerous other websites that get into neurodevelopmental disorders and how substances affect the mothers while pregnant, as well as the offspring. Okay. But now we get past all of that and then become adults. And then we are faced with a choice. But if my mind has already been damaged and I have these issues with hyperactivity, a poor attention span, I've got some cognitive issues and learning and memory problems and all of that, it's going to be hard to receive things like higher education and spirituality, a understanding of the one true God. It's going to be hard to parent. It's going to be difficult to be in a relationship with someone. Prenatal alcohol exposure is associated with increased levels of irritability during infancy. So if mother was complaining about, oh, that child cried so much. Well, mama, you drank. You drank so much. Oh, why was that child so wild? Well, mama was on some cocaine. She was also dipping in some heroin or messing around with this, that, and the other. Okay. Behavioral problems in childhood. And then the behavioral problems show up with these adults, because then they start experimenting with drugs. They start messing around with alcohol. And some women don't even know that they're pregnant and they're still partying. All of these problems. One of the prayers that I prayed years ago, didn't even realize it. I just felt it in my spirit. Praying for cognitive function. Praying that the family members, as well as my own children, would be developing in the way that God wanted them to develop. I was careful, very careful about what I put in my body while pregnant. Because while I was pregnant, God was definitely with me. I was past all of the fun and the partying and having a good old time. And my weakness before babies was for about less than a year drinking and going to the club. And then someone got a hold of me, an evangelist, started speaking to me. And so that wasn't one of those problems for me. So by the time I became pregnant, it was easy. I didn't have any issues with anything. But there were those that I knew who did have their share of issues. Now, what I found interesting was that those children, the FAS and FAE children, that's that fetal alcohol syndrome children, these children were more likely to exhibit antisocial behaviors. So for some folks wondering, a lot of folks got these antisocial types of mannerisms. I mean, what's up with that? People drinking, people acting up, all sorts of childhood issues. So these children were more likely to exhibit antisocial behaviors, lack consideration for the rights and feelings of others, and resist limits and requests by authority figures. They also had high levels of aggression in the classroom. And what was also interesting was that adults with FAS are more likely to get into trouble with the law and to exhibit sexually inappropriate behavior. Once again, connect the dots with some of these family members. Problems with alcohol, more likely to get into trouble. Problems with drugs, more likely to get in trouble. And then when somebody has lowered inhibitions, they also exhibit all sorts of inappropriate behavior. So when we're looking at family history and people tell us so-and-so was drinking and this one was on drugs and all of that, and then we see these patterns that develop with not just the father but the son and then the son's son and all of that, it's safe to say that there's definitely something in the family that's creating it. And that something usually is what the Lord wants us to stay away from. It's something that he'll call us out on. It's something that he will move on us to question members about. For example, with the prenatal alcohol exposure, it's associated with a distinctive pattern of intellectual deficits. So you want a math genius in the family. How's that going to happen? When folks is exposing children to all sorts of alcohol, and then when people get older, they want to party, they still want to do this, that, and the other. All this stuff affects one's mind. They don't have the attention skills they should. Their planning skills are poor. Their cognitive skills are inflexible. They got all sorts of things going on with them, and yet people want to act as if, oh no, alcohol, drugs, cigarettes, all that other stuff, that didn't have anything to do with it. Yes, it does. There's more studies being done every day on this sort of thing. And so for people to sit up here and have this ignorance about these sorts of things affecting the family, shame on them. Because you can't get where God wants you to be if you don't want to deal with the issues. You see. And I looked at the issues and I said, okay, I get it. And I understand that some people we're just not going to reach in the family. They're too far gone with their alcohol issues. They're too far gone with their substance abuse. Their brains are permanently affected in such a way where they don't even reason like they should. And people want to say, well, God got something to do with that. God doesn't have anything to do with it. Man has a choice. He could either stop doing certain things and get his mind back to where it needs to be. Maybe it won't be where God had it, but at least he could save some of his sanity, or he can just keep on partying, keep on doing what he wants to do while bringing other people down in the process. People wanting their children to have these exceptional memories. And meanwhile, they're overlooking the fact that mama, she was doing some things while she was pregnant. Or there is family members around them who got poor IQs. Now, how is that child going to be some brain when the father doesn't even have that type of IQ, and neither does the mother? Now, every now and again, yes, there's an exception, and there's one child that ends up coming out and is far better than the parents. But I'm talking about putting pressure on people when you know that there's a long history of people with low IQs in the family. And not only that, long history of mothers doing all sorts of things while pregnant. Maybe the mom doesn't care about herself, but she should at least care about her child. But you got a lot of selfish mothers. They were selfish while they were carrying children, and that selfishness continues to show up even to this day. And so, once again, when God shows us some things, we're in prayer, but we're also doing the things that are going to keep ourselves as well as others out of bondage. We don't encourage sinful living. We don't partake in sinful lifestyles. So, I thank you as always for taking time out of your busy schedule to listen. Blessings to you. Please do check the description box for anything that might be of interest. You've been listening to YouTube NM Enterprise 7. And if you haven't given, we do welcome donations. To God be the glory.